Hi, it's good to be back with you again. We were in 1 Peter chapter 2 last time that we were together, and I would like to continue in that same passage, 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. We read there that Peter says, "You yourselves are like living stones being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." I'd like to focus on this first part. You yourselves are like living stones being built up into a spiritual house. In our last devotional, we saw that Peter referred to Jesus as a living stone, a stone that had been rejected by men, but who in the sight of God was chosen and precious. And here in verse 5, he extends the stone metaphor to all of those who are followers of Christ. We saw back in verse 4 that it says, as you come to him. In other words, as you come to faith and come to following Jesus Christ, then you yourselves are like living stones being built up into a spiritual house. And you might recall last time we imagined the master builders, the master builders of the temple, as they went to the quarry to choose the stone that they were going to use in the construction of the temple. And they examined all the cut stones that were lying there. Some were chosen and some were rejected. Well, this time in this verse, God himself is the master builder. He is the one who is building this spiritual house. He is the one who is choosing the stones that are going to be used in the building up of this spiritual house, in the building of the Church of Christ. We, Christ followers, are the stones, and we are described as living stones. Here's my first thought. Those who come to Christ are also living stones. We are in the image of Jesus himself. Christ is a living stone, and God makes us into living stones as well. That's almost beyond our ability to imagine. We see Jesus, the Son of God, living a holy life of faith and obedience. His love for God is unflawed. His love for the lost is perfect. His access to the Father is uninhibited. He is completely filled with the Holy Spirit and never fails to follow the Spirit's counsel. And he is infinitely loved by the Father. And then we realize that we are being made into the image of Christ. He, the living stone, we are being made into living stones as well. Here's a second thought. God is taking us, living stones, and building us into a spiritual house. It's the picture of building a place of worship out of stone. But the stones that God is using are living stones, and we are the stones that God uses in building this spiritual house of worship. In England, I visited a church that was completely made of stone. It had been built in the 10th century. It wasn't large, but it was built completely of stone, and it was still standing. It amazed me that a church building made of stones was still standing after more than 1,000 years. You see, it was built carefully and wisely. Each stone supported the weight of the stones around it. And there were no weaknesses because the stones shared the weight, distributed the weight, and gravity, which is constantly working to pull things down, was unable to pull down this building. What a beautiful picture that is of the church that is being built of living stones. God is the master builder. God builds wisely and he builds carefully. And we are the living stones that God is putting into place. And we're meant to stand together with our brothers and sisters. We're meant to share the weight, to distribute the weight, and in this way defy the power of Satan, who acts like gravity, trying to pull us down. God has designed us to fit together perfectly with other believers. He's designed us to work together for the sake of the kingdom. That means that there is no living stone, there is no believer whom God intends to leave out of his building. There is no stone that is left out of the construction of this spiritual house of worship. It also means that no stone can choose to live and go out and make their own place of worship in the woods or in the meadows somewhere. No living stone can leave without weakening the spiritual house that God is building. And no living stone can thrive without the other stones of the spiritual house into which he was designed by God to fit. God has made us living stones in the image of Christ to be the church of Christ, together, supporting one another, encouraging one another, strengthening one another, and doing the work of the kingdom. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that God blesses you today. Thank you.